Andrew, we are honoured that you have come to stay with us in Chattanooga, and we can join forces for this day and to bring the Spirit through in whatever way needs to come and be with us. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I just want to say it's a huge joy for me to be with these two fellow conspirators. Radioactive mischief. I've had the grace to be with them in South Africa in their amazingly beautiful retreat place called Damagiri. And if you ever want to visit a place where you will experience the radiance of the Spirit directly with two great teachers, that's the place. For me, Kittisaro and Thanissaro really are the jewels of the Buddhist world, because they combine three things that are very, very rare. Very deep scholarship, understanding at the deepest levels of the great transmissions of Buddhism. They're both extraordinary writers. And please, before you leave, buy a copy of their book. It's the most beautifully written book on engaged Buddhism and the road to engaged Buddhism that is out there. And it's an extremely important contribution. And the third reason why I so venerate them is that they truly know the meaning of sacred friendship and supporting and loving their friends that they recognize as really turning up in this time to do real work. When I was with them in South Africa, I met the most astonishing older woman. She must be in her 70s, and she's called Sister Abby. And she has a whole group of AIDS orphans that she is personally responsible for. And you cannot meet Sister Abby without wanting internally to fall on your knees, not because she's glamorous or in any way projecting herself, but because she is so down-home holy. And being in her presence is itself an education. And just before I begin my talk, I'd love to tell you something that Sister Abby told me about prayer. We were chatting out in the sun, and I said, how do you sustain this outrageously difficult work that you do on no money, with very little support except from wild ones like Thanissaro and Kittisaro? And she looked at me as if I was naked. She said, prayer. I said, prayer? She said, yes, prayer. If you pray with your whole being and your whole heart, you will get what you need to do the work that God has given you. So I said, okay. And I was teasing her because I totally believe in the power of prayer, but I wanted to know what was up her gazuza. So she said, I said, give me an example of the power of prayer. And this is Sister Abby in a nutshell. And I wish to God that all of us had this kind of faith, because if we did, we could move the Himalayas with one little finger. She said, okay, I'll give you an example. One day, I broke my ankle. I've got 25 kids to look after. I can't afford to have a broken ankle. So you know what I did? I sat down and I talked to Jesus. And this is what I said. I said, you have two choices. Sister Abby was kind. She laid out to the divine possibilities. But she narrowed them to two. And she said, your two choices are the following. Either you can heal me now, or you can do the housework. And you can go and collect the food, and you can take the kids to school. Your choice. The next day, her ankle was unbelievably better. So much so that the doctors couldn't believe it. And I felt the power of what she was saying. And I felt that if she this simple, humble woman who has just refused to look away from the pain of the world and dedicated her deepest soul energies to helping children that have been abandoned, if she could communicate that to every human heart, that direct connection, then we would have a completely different world. Because in that exchange in the garden in South Africa, I experienced the essence of sacred activism. I'm going to be talking to you about sacred activism, and I'll be saying some pretty grand and exalted things. But everything boils down to what Sister Abby was representing on that day. Real faith, total claiming of your own divine relationship with the divine, as a child of the divine, however you express it, and the guts to call upon that relationship day in, day out, to give you the energy, the stamina, the passion, the truth, the power that you and I are going to need at this moment of the earth's most excruciating grief and sadness and desolation. So you have two choices. That is my favorite story. And the wonderful thing is that her memoir is going to come out in the same series that Thanissara's new book on engaged Buddhism, called Time to Stand Up. That's a hell of a title in the Buddhist world. Bravo! So, today is dedicated to love in action. And it's dedicated to love in action as transmitted to us from the two great heart brothers at the core of the world's mystical traditions, the Buddha and the Christ. And in superficial ways, they seem very different. But the reality is that the Buddha and the Christ are two brilliant, burning facets of the same diamond of heart consciousness that we all discover as our innate nature as the mystical path unfolds. Last year I went back to a place in which my life changed forever, Ladakh. And some of you may have read my book, A Journey in Ladakh. And in that book I describe meeting at the age of 29 a great, luminous, vibrant, smiling, extraordinary Buddha of a man called Tukse Rinpoche, who initiated me into Mahayana Buddhism in a monastery called Hemis. I'm telling you this story because Hemis is the monastery in which there are the scrolls that were translated by a Russian in the 19th century, scrolls in Sanskrit that describe the wild, gorgeous teachings of a man called Isa, who came to India in the early part of AD, or the end of BC, and who may very well have been Jesus himself. Because many scholars believe that in the years that we know nothing about Jesus' life, he may very well have gone to India, gone to be instructed in Benares by the great Hindu sages, and then gone into the mountains to be taught the deep mystical secrets of Buddhism. And one of the ways you can tell that it could be Isa, and I have had these scrolls in my hands, is that the being in those scrolls is ferociously radical
and confrontational with all of the elitist and patriarchal aspects of religion. He attacks the Brahmins for their casteism, and he calls the Buddhists on their tendency to go off into the light and not remain on the ground engaging with the pain of the world. So here I am, sitting in the monastery where 2,000 years before a young seeker of extraordinary intensity came, perhaps, to be taught the reality of the Buddha's transmission. And last year, I had the honor of being in the main temple with this vast statue of Padmasambhava, and was invited to give a talk on the Buddha and the Christ in the place where the mystery of their communion was probably celebrated. And before I go on, I just want to tell you something that I'm sure you already know. The highest ideal, perhaps that we have been given as human beings, is the ideal of the Bodhisattva, which is at the core of Mahayana Buddhism. And a Bodhisattva is someone who loves so deeply and so passionately, from the fullness of his or her being, all sentient beings, that he or she makes the vow, and I have made this vow, and you've made this vow, and you have made this vow, to return again and again and again and again and again to this burning world until all sentient beings are liberated. There is no more terrible and beautiful and holy vow. And many scholars believe that why Hinayana evolved from its more private vision of liberation to this vast and all-embracing vision of liberation is because Buddhist mystics met some of the early mystics of Christianity and realized that what was coming through Jesus was an immense passion to transform with holy power and holy love all of the conditions of life on earth, and that this transmission echoed something very deep but still hidden in the Buddha's transmission, but now had to be made explicit. So in Hemis we have this mysterious and amazing possibility of Jesus being instructed by the depths of Buddhism. And if you read the New Testament, there are many, many parallels between Jesus' parables and the Buddha's parables. And here we have in the Bodhisattva ideal an example of how the deepest wisdom of Buddhism came together in its own unique way with the deepest wisdom of the Christ to give us, the human race, an ideal of love in action and love in service that can transform our world. So I'm going to begin by perfuming our hearts with first the greatest single prayer for the Bodhisattva ever written by a man called Shantideva. And it's this prayer that the greatest sacred activist on the earth, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, does every single morning at 4 o'clock when he wakes up and offers his whole life yet again to the transformation of the planet. And then I'm going to read the most beautiful for me of all of the Gospel passages, Matthew 25. And if only Matthew 25 survived of this man, Jesus, we would know that in him the heart had been born in heart, mind, soul, and body, and as a dynamic, ecstatic, powerful, compassionate force of transformation. So with what I've said already, I'm inviting you to hear these two great sacred texts as two ways of approaching the same mystery, the mystery of becoming a human being so dedicated to wisdom and compassion that you lay your whole life down in service to all beings forever and ever and ever, in an act of adoration and surrender and profound commitment to use all of your mental, emotional, and spiritual energies in service of the creation of a just, balanced, harmonious, loving world. So here are your two brothers, your two heart brothers. The Buddha, the great wind of spaciousness, and the Christ, the fire of divine passion and action. But if you want a forest fire, what you need is a strong wind carrying the flame everywhere. So these two amazing beings are actually at this moment coming together in ways that enrich deeply both Buddhism and Christianity, but far more importantly than that even, give human beings at this crazy, tragic, desperate moment a very coherent vision of what reality is and what our response to reality must be. So please close your eyes. And please, as you listen to me reading this prayer of Shantideva's, there's such a beautiful story about Shantideva which I have to tell you. Shantideva was a totally unremarkable looking man, largely despised in the monastery that he lived in. I think he looked after the toilets or swept the halls. And one day, the monks decided to humiliate them. This was not a very evolved monastery, but they were clearly having some Sunday afternoon fun. So they said to Shantideva, go and sit on the Rinpoche's throne and give us a teaching, expecting to be rolling in the aisles at his ignorance. Shantideva bowed to the throne, bowed to all of these naughty, nasty monks, sat on the throne, and he delivered the Bodhicharya Avatara, the supreme text on how to train your whole being to become this soldier midwife of compassion in action in reality. So imagine the toilet cleaner on the throne announcing this as the way to be a fully human, fully divine being dedicated to transformation of the world through love. It's amazing. This is the prayer of the Bodhisattva. This is your and my deepest, deepest prayer. The prayer that you and I will make when we step outside the confines of our narrow self, of our karmic conditioning, of our addiction to our limitations. The prayer that is being sounded right now in every human heart, waiting for human beings to hear in the depths of themselves. There is no more beautiful and no more terrible prayer. Because if you're really listening, as I know you will be, believe me, I will know if you're not, you will be at once exalted and sobered. So, I would be a protector for those without protection. I would be a leader for those who journey, and a boat, a bridge, a passage for those desiring the further shore. For all creatures, I would be a lantern for those desiring a lantern. I would be a bed for those desiring a bed. I would be a slave for those desiring a slave. I would be for creatures a magic jewel, an inexhaustible jar, a powerful spell, a universal remedy, a wishing tree, and a cow of plenty. As the earth and other elements are in various ways for the enjoyment of innumerable beings dwelling in all of space, so may I be in various ways the means of sustenance for the living beings occupying space for as long a time as all are not satisfied.